Now, hundreds of farmers protested this week outside the EU headquarters, and tempers have flared over better working conditions. France has been at the centre of a growing dispute across Europe, with tens of thousands of farmers staging demonstrations. Germany, Poland, Belgium, Italy, and where it originally started, which was Holland. They want environmental rules to be relaxed and help to deal with rising costs. The scenes are actually quite violent. Now, joining me now is political commentator Ralph Scholhammer and a deputy leader of Rejoin the EU party, Richard Morley. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. Now, this is a protest, I believe, that started in Holland originally. But if you can just tell us, Ralph, what farmers are actually protesting about? What is the main gripe they have?
Well, it depends. In the Netherlands, it was about fertilizer. In Germany, it's about the so-called diesel privilege. In France, it's about restrictions on the use of pesticides. So it's a kind of a huge bag of different issues all across Europe. But the main motivation is that the agricultural sector, even though the European Union spends around 380 billion on the agricultural sector every year, that they feel that they are coming under pressure and that under the conditions the EU is proposing, their outputs, their competitiveness will decline significantly. And as it currently looks like, the population is supporting that position all over Europe.
So in France, they've literally blockaded Paris, haven't they? The tractors are on the motorway, stopping food and other things getting into the capital city.
Yes, the French government, however, has shown quite a willingness to compromise, and we have to keep one thing in mind. If the French start to protest, they try to do it in very creative and intensive ways. So this is not just a farmers' issue, this is also a little bit part of the national culture of the French. The protests in Germany, for example, were significantly, let's say, less inconvenient for a majority of the population. So this is not just the farmers, there is also, of course, a significant part of national culture at play.
Richard, bringing you in on this one. Richard, these seem to be mainly about the regulations that the EU have brought in and are imposing on farmers. There was one story I was reading even about a farmer saying they're flying drones over his land to see exactly whether he's sticking by the regulations they put in place. Surely this is not good news for the EU and the future of the EU, with so many countries now getting involved in these protests.
Well, I completely agree with Ralph that the causes of this dispute are varying from country to country. In Germany, for example, one of the principal complaints that the farmers have is the withdrawal of the fuel subsidies that have been given since the Ukrainian war started. And now they're coming to an end. And so farmers are faced with ever-rising costs, largely due to the war, which, of course, has made fuel prices very much more expensive. There's another factor, and that is the increased competition that comes from external, outside EU trade deals, which involves food. And that problem means that farmers can't sell their produce for the same prices as they could before, so they're faced with falling incomes. And I would say that this is not just a problem that the EU faces, it's a problem that Britain faces as well. Britain also faces the additional problem of a huge deficit in the workers that they require, 500,000 short in 2022 because of the Britain's leaving the EU and that supply of workers failing. So there are a number of problems contributing to this problem with farmers. But let's face it, farming is undergoing a revolution because of new technology, which does not favour the small farmer. In France, I know that the Farmers' Union has acknowledged the fact that the French government has subsidized them, and in fact the German government does the same. Those subsidies are not so easily available in Britain, and consequently I don't think the problem overall in Europe is as bad as it will be in Britain when these issues come to play there. Let's not think that Britain is immune from this problem.
Ralph, do you agree with that?
I have to respectfully make a slight correction of what Richard said, right? The fuel subsidies in Germany did not exist because of the Ukraine war. The reason why they were subsidized was because in Germany, gasoline taxes are paid in order to maintain the roads, but farmers don't use roads, they drive on their fields, and therefore they didn't have to pay the tax. The German government now want them to pay tax because they have a huge gap in their budget, and they want to use or abuse the farmers to kind of fill that budget hole. The other thing is, Richard is correct. EU policy was to support small farmers. On average, UK farms are larger than European farms. This is one of the reasons why I don't see these protests in the UK. But we should not lose focus on one thing. A lot of these regulations that are planned in London and that are planned in Brussels are made by people who have no clue how farming works. For example, the idea to reduce the use of fertilizer by 30% assumes that farmers in Europe are simply wasting fertilizer, like as if there is no tomorrow, which is not true. Fertilizer is expensive. It got even more expensive due to the war. So they're already, let's say, very, very niggardly in the use of that resource. So this is very problematic when people who don't really understand how farming works start to formulate regulations. And this is also part of these protests.
So it does sound, Richard, forgive me here, but it does sound like the EU do have a lot of responsibility for the protests we are seeing across Europe. It's rules and regulations set by them, particularly with regard to the environment, that they don't understand how farming seems to operate, though.
Well, I mean, you're trying to sort of push this as being an EU problem, as if Britain is somehow immune from it because it's not part of the EU, and I just don't think that's true. The problems in Europe are there. Bureaucracy, of course, is a major problem, but bureaucracy is also a major problem in Britain, where farmers, although the households, we spent in Britain 7 billion more on food supplies last year than we did in the year before. And so let's face it, this problem with farming is an issue of our age as we transform from basically a traditional system of farming into what will be in the future, which I believe will be very much more large firm based. And of course, we're going through a revolution in this way, and the farmers have to be fairly treated and handled during that revolution. And I think the EU isn't doing badly in its efforts.
Sorry, gentlemen, we've completely run out of time. It's such an amazing debate. Thank you very much.